My topic today is on game management, and what I think is gonna be a very interesting uh, component of this presentation is you're going to hear reinforcements of many of the things that you're learning in other clinics. We're talking about mechanics and rules applications. A lot of that is technical knowledge. When we get into the game management part, now this is more of the soft skills, and it's applying a lot of the things that we're learning in those technical arenas into um, a more active use. So let's start out. Did that go? Come on. Now I gotta. Yeah, okay, I gotta go. Okay, so let's talk about what management is. And according to dictionary.com, which is my local resource, it's the process of dealing with or controlling things or people. And we have to think about, what are we dealing with? Dealing with is, more abstract. So I think our biggest concern in our current world is that we're going to be dealing with a lot of changes that are put upon us based on the COVID situation. We've already talked about adjusting face-offs. We're talking about masks. We're talking about distancing at the pregame, and how we're going to interact with the table. Those are all being impacted. There's all changes we have to be ready to embrace and figure out how to deal with. Another big thing we're dealing with in lacrosse is conflict. It's a competitive sport, and by nature it creates conflict. That's the whole point of the game. It's kind of, I'm going to try and impose my will upon you, and that's a source of conflict. And competition has conflict in it by nature. So what are we also ideally controlling? We're talking about people, our crew, the coaches, players, the people at the table. We have to have control over all of those constituents. Sometimes we have to control the fans. It's not always on us, but it's, we sometimes have some help. Sometimes we don't. And so we have to be ready to do that. What are we controlling? We're controlling the game. We have to understand what our foul tolerances are. We have to make sure that it's safe and fair. Those are what we're controlling to encourage those two ideals, because then that leads to it being fun. You also have to control your emotions. When we talk about conflict, emotions can change, and you have to control yours, and you have to help control that of the others, whether you like it or not. Losing our cool is not a good way to manage a game. I think that's going to lead us down a path that is going to be unfavorable. Enticing or inducing emotional loss of emotional control in others is probably not a good game management practice, because it's going to lead us down, again, another path to that makes a game a little bit more difficult. So that's kind of just a broad definition of management. Can we even see the top of my slide? We can't. Can you? Okay, I just can't because of the header. Okay, great. So, when we're talking about game management, I always think of it as having three phases. We'll talk about pregame, which is what we're starting here, and that sets the tone for what we're going to do during our upcoming games. We have in-game management, which is really the meat and potatoes. It's the action of what we do. And then we'll have post-game management, which is really, how we deal with the things after the game. Because management really it's about preparation, it's about execution, and then it's about follow-up. So we have those three concepts that we're going to work on through this presentation to help us have a better game experience. So we're with preseason or a pregame management. It starts as early as preseason. It means it's starting really for you guys, a lot of you guys today. It's starting with the training. It's taking our rule tests and doing rule reviews with our friends and colleagues. It's being involved in discussions. Some people participate in some message boards. I know if I'm together with one or two officials, no matter what environment we're in, the discussion evidently, eventually gets back to game situations that were odd or different or funny. It's also part of our pregame management is making sure our fitness is at an adequate place. And as those of us who are getting a little older are finding, that's getting to be a bigger challenge every year. Another really important part of pregame management is accepting your games in a timely manner. I figured I'd put that plug in for all the assigners. It helps you set your schedule, and it helps your colleagues, if you have to turn back a game, to be able to get their schedule set early enough and help them with their pregame management. When we're talking about pregame management in the week of the game, we have referees have tasks. Different crew members have other responsibilities, but we need to have professional and courteous contact with the host school or association if they are. If we're on the crew, we are supposed to be contacting our referee to let him know that we're confirming to be on the game. As somebody who's been a referee for a long period of time, it's really frustrating when my crew does not check in. I don't know if you're in the hospital after a car accident, if you don't care about the game, but it puts the referee kind of in a bad position. And I might send you a snarky email to try and encourage you to check in. When we get to the day of the game, you're going to have all your gear packed. Are you going to have your departure time planned and your map routed out so that you know when you can get there on time based on what the expectation of the crew is? Have you been aware of any weather that may be coming in? Because there's nothing worse than being at a 30-degree and sleet game with a guy who only has short sleeves. And do you have your phone on so that if there is a late change or a cancellation, so that you can be contacted? That's also a part of that preparation. And then we get to the traditional pregame when we're pre-gaming with our crew, which is to align those crew emphases and to try and make sure everybody understands what their roles are, who's got what jobs in before the game, what are we going to be watching out for, if there's anything that's come from assigners that needs to be propagated forward to all the crew members. The pregame coach meeting. We talk about being courteous and confident in a pregame coach meeting as opposed to cocky and condescending. I can tell you I've had a very interesting experience with an official from the St. Louis area whose pregame with the coaches and the captains is the same thing. For the coaches, you say, "Do you certify?" And the coach looks at him and says, "Yes." "Okay. Do you certify?" "Yeah." "Okay, we start at this time." That's the extent of his coach pregame meeting. And, I think that sets a tone of not really being involved in the game. We don't have to be, backslapping with the coaches, but I think you want to come into these kinds of coach meetings with the attitude of being ready to enjoy yourself. "Good afternoon, coach. Nice to be at your field today. Things are looking great. It's a wonderful day." This is start with the coach like that. And, wait until a certain coach from a southwestern suburb asks you about a ruling in the coach pregame, trying to trip you up before you get a little salty with him. And the next part we move, we've done all our pregame, our preseason prep, we've taken care of our business needs in the week leading up to. We've had a great pregame with our crew. We've interacted properly with the coaches and with the captains, and we're ready to play the game. So when we get into the in-game management, I think we have to understand three things. We have to understand the game level. A state high school league is officiated very differently than a YLM 8U game. Weekend tournaments are a different beast as well. They're fairly unique. Those of us who are refereeing college or box lacrosse, we have to understand, what the level is there too. Know which rule set you're applying, any variations for the specific events. Okay, you want to understand the possible stakes. Is this a inter-squad preseason scrimmage in which coaches are going to be stopping play to help instruct their players? Is this a section semifinal? Okay, is this a bracket game in a weekend tournament that has a big trophy, that's a big trophy game? You also kind of sometimes have to understand the history. You have to know that Minnetonka versus Wayzata is a pretty big rivalry game, and emotions are going to start at a higher level. You have to know that when you're doing a U8 game, that you're going to be guiding players to a much larger degree because they're new to the game and they may not understand that they have to maybe step inbounds to restart play after a shot goes out of bounds. So you want to have understanding in those three areas. A few other things for that in-game management is we want to recognize cues to player escalation. You see that big hit. You see that somebody, you see guys chirping at each other. When there's any kind of physical contact, that's getting larger cheers from the benches than do goals. Okay, we want to recognize if a partner is struggling, whether that's because they're new to the game, or it could be a situation that I had in a state quarterfinal game when it was 96 degrees and the dew point was somewhere around 75. And I had a partner who was struggling with the heat, and I had to tell the doctor on the sideline to keep an eye on that person. And I told the backup official that he had to be ready. So you've got to understand those things. Or if the partner is not dealing well with interacting with the coach, you've got to recognize that, and we'll take some action about that. Yeah, you need to recognize that the game needs to be locked down. My default level of tolerance is pretty high for physical play, but when again they're starting to play, when they stop playing lacrosse and start fighting and being in working to hurt each other, we recognize that we need to lock that game down and get it back into what is an acceptable sport for the level that we're playing. Another really important part of in-game management is using good dead ball officiating practices. One of the areas that I think that I'm still working on is an example where there's you've called a penalty and the ball goes, there's a big slash, it knocks the ball out of the stick and out of bounds. And you want to watch those guys, the ball's dead right now. You want to watch those guys for a couple extra seconds to make sure that there's no retaliation. I have been guilty of, I'm so excited to report the foul to my trail that I've turned my head and maybe missed something. All right. We want to talk to guys about getting separated or putting yourself between players who may be chirping each other after a goal. Just get that presence in there. Those are things you can, those are kind of small management practices you can use to keep your game going in a positive direction. So your number one tool in management is communication, okay? We're talking with our crew. We're going to discuss those situations. We're going to talk to each other. Remind your partner about whether player X has done something. I also like to encourage, within the crew, if you see somebody who has really hauled keister to get into a coverage position that was challenging, recognize that, okay? Build your crew up while you're working with them. We're constantly talking about communicating with the players. We're going to provide those verbal cues to let players know when they're approaching a foul. We're not going to tell them to stop slashing, but we're going to say, make sure you're getting on the stick. Don't let your hands get too far apart. We talk to them about that, giving them directions when they're bringing the ball in. Stop your feet before you come in. We can do that 5 yard, make sure we get that 5 yards off that cold restart. We can talk to that defensive player before the offensive player's back in. When there's the face off, let the guys know when the ball's out so they can disengage. Okay. A big point of emphasis for a long time has been communication with the coaches. And my philosophy on that is we'll work as hard we can to explain something as well as we can, as long as we can continue to do our job officiating. We can't lose a guy on a 2-man crew or even on a 3-man crew who's engaged in a lengthy discussion with a coach during live play. We still have to do our job officiating. Okay, your partners are counting on you to be in the game. And we have to communicate with the bench area. If there's a situation where we have made a mistake and pointed the wrong direction, or if we've awarded the ball incorrectly, we're going to take our time and make sure that everybody is clear about where the ball is headed, who has possession. Or if there's a complex ruling, we've mentioned simultaneous fouls. That sometimes takes a little more explanation with the table and the coaches and that whole bench area, so everybody knows what's going on. All right, we want to use that communication as our number one tool for game management. By doing those things, we can hopefully alleviate stresses and frustrations that lead to bad behavior down the road. So that's really the point of the communication piece. Okay. Our number two tool is our flag. Okay. We need to penalize when there are fouls. Okay. We need to penalize to deter overly aggressive behavior. We have tools of using multiple minutes to make sure the coaches and the players understand that that was a more severe foul. And we also have the tool of fouling out bad actors. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to eject them, but which is an acceptable end result. But fouling somebody out is a way of kind of gaining control of the game and getting him off the field, particularly if he's one of those players that's tending to escalate other people. Okay, we have to be willing to eject coaches who earn it. We have the bench warning as a tool to guide their behavior. We have the ramp in front of that. So we've given every opportunity to get our message across about what the behavior is unacceptable by those coaches. We can't be afraid to move it to ejection. The nice thing is the NFHS has provided us with a little bit of penalty length release, so that we're punishing the coach and not as much the players if we get to the ejection part of that. When you've got a malcontented player, we have to be ready to eject them if they're doing things like cross-checking people from behind in the head. All right, that's not lacrosse. That's something that we have to be ready to eject players for. And Jason Nickleby and the MSHSL will support ejections for poor or dangerous behavior. And in fact, when we've had meetings with them and they get reports from us about certain behaviors and bad, the first question that Jason asks is, did you eject them? Okay. And the reason being is if you eject them, that gives the MSHSL more tools to work with to address that behavior with the athletic director and the team itself. So I'm not saying that we're seeking out ejections, but it has to be a part of our toolbox that we're not afraid to use. So finally, we've gotten through the game, hopefully without too much in the way of incident. And I've lifted this slide directly from Brad's presentation last year. And we do the overtime with the R. I sometimes call it the post-mortem of the game. But when the game ends, we're going to stay together, and we want to exit as a group if we can. Mark mentioned between the sessions here that there's lots of Karens out doing things. We don't want to put one of our crew members in a situation where they're isolated and may encounter some people who may have nefarious intent. So we'll even if the game went well, we're going to exit as a group. If there's information we need from the score, we want to get that. If there was an ejection, we want to get the name and the player's number out of the scorebook so that we have that information to provide in our report. I really like to spend 10 or sometimes 15 minutes after a game talking about it. Here's what we did well as a crew. Here's what you did well as an umpire. Here's an area I think that you could work on in your next game. What do you need more from me as an R? Those are kind of the discussions we can have. Let's talk, there was a really complex call. I don't understand what you did when you did this. And now you can, if I'm asking somebody because I don't understand why they called a foul, they can tell me what their justification was. We can determine whether that was appropriate, where there may be a better way of doing it, or I may learn something from them. That's a really important part of that is being open to learning. But for a lot of us who are referees, we should be spending that time doing this, and we should give everybody in our crew 1 or 2 little things to work on for their next game. And if you've gotten those things from an R, during your crew pregame with your next referee, say, hey, Matt Dempsey told me I should work on this. Can you watch for me? I'm going to try and improve on that. That's an okay thing to do. That's a really, that's how you become a better official. And you're helping the game management for that next game. Okay. When I have a tough game, I'm up for like 2 or 3 hours, no matter what, after it. Because I want to try and figure out how I can make that game less tough the next time I encounter that situation. So I'm certainly getting into my rule book. If there are any questions about a rule application or enforcement, if we've had something that deserves reporting, that referee is going to be reporting to the assigner for sure. And then and you have to fill out the MSHSL incident report. And then if it's a YLM game, you're going to the league authority there. But this includes those ejections. You want to record serious injuries. If a player is carried off or if an ambulance is called. If there's a field issue, we do have to notify about that, those kinds of things. I think it's really important as a as a referee to make sure my assigners know who's doing well and who is having trouble. If your referee is particularly good, that's something, or is doing a poor job, that's something that crew members should be talking to their assigner about as well. All right. The post-game management is about that continuous improvement aspect. We want to, I don't think there's anybody who is the perfect official at this juncture. Well, maybe John, but a lot of us can improve a great deal. A lot of us have developed some habits that may not be helping us do a great job officiating. We need to work on adjusting those. So this, the after you get home part is something that could help you with that part of your game. So I think that is the extent of my presentation, kind of a short and sweet one. And that actually, I think, gets us pretty close to back on time. So if there was anybody had any questions, I'm happy to entertain those.
Hey, Chris, one thing I would add too is that a lot of these players, especially in the rivalry game, will test what your level is for acceptable hits and things. So if you set the tone earlier, you're going to call the little late stuff, you call it early, you're not going to see it building up and escalating throughout the game. So you kind of nip it in the bud early. But if you wait, they're going to keep going, oh, I didn't call that. I got away with 1 step. Oh, I got away with 2 steps.
Yep.
So I think that's a key thing that you can do for game management. Thank you.
Rivalry game, or when you're dealing with a team that may be less skilled over match.
Hey, Chris, I got a question. I always kind of struggle with, because if you've been officiating enough in the area, the general rivalries between schools and stuff like that. I always struggle with, is it best to, say you're going to go in, say you got Breck Blake or something like that. Is it best to go in thinking, hey, this is going to be pretty intense? Or do you like to go in with kind of a clean slate and no preconceived notions about that? I always try to not try and judge it from, I don't know if that makes any sense or not. But.
No, I know what you're saying, Ross. And I think that I don't think you can avoid the conception. The question is whether you propagate it to your crew. And there's a difference between prejudicing your crew and making them aware of a potential problem. And so, and I think that that's kind of a pretty esoteric difference. It's something that you're going to kind of develop through a little bit of trial and error. Because I don't want a second-year guy being gun shy when he's doing my Eden Prairie Benilde game with me. I don't want him terrified that he's going to be encountering the worst experience of his life, because actually that's a very fun game and you should be enjoying yourself. So we don't want to take the fun out of our officiating by prejudicing our crew, but letting them know, hey, this is a big game. We're going to call it so it stays safe and fair. I wouldn't say, I know that 14 is a cheap MRFer and we're going to make sure he gets out of the game. We're not going to say that in the pregame. I think that's the difference. Anything else?
A little worried I was going to have to use the beep button on you there, Chris.
I'm trying to. I also have my family in the house here as well, so I'm probably not going to get too blue on that.
All right. Well, thank you, Chris.
Just quickly, the last thing I want to say, Chris, what Chris said about the State High School League and other groups, please, if we have, and we're talking about that 5% of the real idiots that do some things in a game, whether it's a coach or a player, if you let it go, you are screwing your partners for the future. So don't. Nobody wants that. We don't want it. We're not going to pat you in the back because you're going to tell you got tough skin, you've been reffing forever. Who gives a crap? Call that stuff from people. Don't tolerate it. Remember, you have new guys reffing with you. They don't like it. They feel uncomfortable. We've interviewed almost every guy that's quit lacrosse, and they've told us over and over again, they quit because they got too much crap from coaches, players, and administrators. It's got to stop. So you do your job.
Yeah.
Well done, Chris.
Hey, Matt, unmute yourself. But another tool that's in our bag that is, I'll do it in a youth game. I wouldn't necessarily do it at the club level, but is that bench warning that we could do at the State High School League games.
Yep. Yeah, and I mean that.
Want to touch on that?
Yeah, and I think Chris alluded to it. It's a really useful tool. I'd like to call it public shaming, if nothing else.
Yeah.
There is nothing. It's nothing more than an announcement that this team is behaving poorly, and generally it's the coach or the sideline. But what you do is you stop the game. Don't pick a good time to stop it. When it's already going to stop. Don't stop a fast break or something, but you just stop, walk over like you're reporting a penalty, but you just say, I want it recorded in the rule book that this is the bench warning for the red team or the blue team or, whoever. And you don't necessarily, for their behavior, you don't have to give much more of an explanation, but just stop, let everybody know, announce it to the table and, the fans and everybody else. And, they're definitely put on warning. It's not as you go by, coach, that's enough now, you got to be quiet. This is very public and it tends to carry a good deal of weight. They know now that you are quite serious. I noticed that Max posted in the chat about, we get the expectation that we have to go through all these steps and that's definitely not the case. If it's bad enough to start, penalize it. But if you can, try to use these other tools to correct the behavior before it arrives at a penalty, great. And that bench warning is, they started it, I think, in basketball, and then propagated it over to us in lacrosse. And I think it's worked well for basketball, and I think it can work well for us as well. So remember, you have it.
And it's not a change of possession or anything. You just stop, say it, and then you can take a little pause here and get things realigned and start it up again. So you're not putting anybody in the box or anything like that or turnover.
Nope, but you're making everybody in the whole cotton picking stadium aware that you've had enough.
Exactly. Yep.
Matt, you said not to use it during a fast break. I actually had a situation where the white team coach was over the edge when his team had the ball in a fast break. And so I stopped it and gave the warning and took the fast break away.
I guess that's one step less than giving them a conduct foul, because you're not going to turn over the ball, but you just you stopped them dead in their tracks, and they're going to have to live with that, I guess. So yeah, you certainly can, but be aware that that's not generally the expected use, but certainly you can use those tools in creative ways if you need to.
Yeah. Have any of you guys ever ended a game based on behavior?
For hockey, I have, but not lacrosse.
I've seen it done in lacrosse, and I think I may have done it, bench clearing kind of thing in the last few minutes of the game, and you're just like, no, we're done.
Well, we had one at the youth level up in Blaine this summer. Was one of the final games or whatever, and the game was in pretty good control, but the parents were starting to get kind of chippy, and kind of told them that we had called the penalties and they're screaming and hollering, and told them just kind of, hey, to kind of relax or whatever and stuff. And I went over to the coaches and said, hey, guys need to get your fans out of control. And they walked over and they showed them, and they got the parent to walk away, but it was like a 12-1 game. So the coaches kind of said, yeah, we're just done and stuff. So, but yeah, I mean, we had the parents were just kind of out of control.
I've done the running clock and let it run.
Yeah. But the coaches
All
called
right, let's take another 5-minute break, guys, and then we'll get going here about 22. All right, thanks.